Hi, I'd like to welcome you to this session where we're going to talk about what are the benefits and challenges of remote working for a global business. My name is Peter Kinselley, and I am the technical lead for health and safety, both for Cardinus risk management and also from our client group. And I'm very proud of the work that we undertake because the work I have and I undertake with our clients actually allows me to have a view of, the global health and safety activities that take place. And I think the most important thing in the conversations that I'm having with my client group at the moment are that there are a number of things on people's minds. And I'm also going to reflect on a couple of comments that were, made earlier on yesterday and today by the keynote speakers. That in reality, we've been through a period of quite considerable change, and I'm going to reflect upon that in a second. But actually, at the moment, what we're trying to do is organise ourselves in such a way that we're thinking about returning back to the workplace after a considerable period of time. Actually, what are the issues about returning to work and what will work best for our teams? And then also for many of you that actually work in that global workspace, actually what are the regulatory and regulatory requirements that we will face post-pandemic? I think it's really important that what we do is we just take a moment to actually have a look at we take a moment to reflect on where we are in respect of the pandemic. Sorry, I've got some slides and for some reason they're not moving. Okay, I'm just going to continue without them and I'm going to work my way through this. So there is a common theme really amongst the guest speakers that you'll hear during the course of these presentations. And in reality, when we actually have a look at this, what we're trying to do is actually help businesses on the road out of the pandemic and on a road to recovery. And much work that we've done in Cardinus actually over the last 18 months has been to provide support to both our clients and the businesses that we support. And as part of this commitment by us as an organisation has been to actually ensure that we provide the best level of support that we can. And what I was given the opportunity was to look at remote working and was given the challenge to actually give a view on what are the benefits and challenges of remote working for a global business. And I think it's really important that what we do is we actually take a moment to actually consider this. And the white paper that we've developed is also available from our website that you can actually download and forms the basis of the presentation that I'm going to undertake. The research we undertook looked at all sorts of things. So we actually spent time looking at research papers, journal articles, okay, that might work. Sorry about this. Yeah, so we looked at all sorts of things. We looked at research articles. We looked at a range of academic research. So we actually looked at things like EHS Today, SHP Online. We looked at research that were undertaken by the International Labour Organization and Eurostat, which are eminent research organizations, and also looked at early adopters of remote working, such as IBM, who've provided a white paper on the benefits and challenges of remote working. And this was actually produced back in the early 2000s. Remote working is not a new topic, and remote working may not necessarily fit your organizational model. And some of this is around the terminology and names that we actually give to this particular topic. And I think it's really important that what we do is we actually have a think about this for a moment, because the terms that we tend to use, actually differ from organization to organization. And I think we need to actually consider this. Academics and organisations like the International Labour Organization, OSHA, and OSHA Europe use the term teleworking. And actually, this term has also been used by governments and used in setting legislation. There is also the use of other terms. And again, one of our keynote speaker, reflected on this yesterday. And there are at least 18 different terms that are used, such as agile and flexible working. And our chief exec, Andy Hawkes, actually particularly likes the term hybrid working. The key really to actually understanding what is remote working is the amount of time we spend away from the organizational building rather than the roles that we undertake. And, on reflection, when we look at the pandemic as it exists at the moment, we've all become experts on this particular subject. The reason why I say that remote working is not a new idea is that the term was first coined back in 1973 by James Nellers. And when we look at it, so from a date perspective, we think about 1973 as being a long time ago. And then it took the Houston Chronicle to set up the first remote worker in 1986 before actually somebody took up the idea of remote working. And then it was not until 1994 that AT&T actually set up its first telecommuting day. I think from this, we can actually see there's a story. Culturally, we see remote working, or culturally, we've seen remote working in the past as being a perk of a role, and therefore it's not particularly been subject to formalization. It's been something where we've looked at managers and directors in organizations who've actually allowed individuals to take time to work from home, to cut down on the daily commute, and seen as a benefit rather than actually sitting down and thinking, what is it we need to do to actually make this work properly? This also helps us set the scene for us when we think about remote working. The current pandemic has actually shown us that we can work effectively using a remote working model. And in reality, events like today couldn't exist without the form of technology that we have. But this statement comes with a health warning. And I think we've got to actually take a moment, and particularly organisations need to consider our duty of care to our staff, to our community, and to the environment, and not just based on we return to the office or we stay at home. I think it's something that we need to carefully consider. And again, reflecting on the two keynote speakers that we've had yesterday and today, this was something that actually was highlighted to the audience that were listening. There is also a theme that runs through our speakers today, and that's talking about the growing health issues surrounded about remote working in the current pandemic. Key topics include mental ill health, the lack of movement, and weight gain. The challenge with these particular issues is that they are going to affect the remote working population and the working population for years to come. This is going to be something we're going to have to plan for and look at. It has also been identified that particular groups of home workers have struggled. And again, I reflect upon our keynote speaker from earlier today, where as a working mother, she spoke about the challenges that she faced juggling work, home, and the challenges of actually managing, sort of the home life. When we think about things such as homeschooling, many of us are ill equipped to actually, sort of help our children through these types of challenges. And this just adds to the pressure that we're going to face during a pandemic. And I think also, if you think about the effect of COVID on people, actually some of those challenges can be reflected on, living in a space where you've got a sick, partner or person that you're caring for, and actually have the challenge of them self-isolating and then making sure that you're taking care of them. And then we mustn't forget the younger members of the team. So those that are less well established, and particularly, sort of take a moment to think about the living conditions that people potentially can be in, living in our towns and cities. The effect really is that, a lot of our young workers are living in environments where they're isolated, living on their own, in accommodation that, means that home life and social life all morphs into one because of the space that's being occupied by them. And I think the key thing around this, and particularly when looking at the research, is that, these areas of mental ill health that can manifest themselves from these types of events have really been well documented and been documented for a period of time. So the thoughts of loneliness, anxiety, and depression really are something that are, sort of have been recognized before. However, they haven't been given any credence or airtime up until now. And what we're seeing is that these concerns are being reinforced through the journals and press during during this current pandemic period. And we've probably all encountered people that have struggled over the past 18 months. So it's important that what we do is we actually, sort of take a moment to consider this with our new working models. Musculoskeletal disorders are also the most common cause of chronic pain and long-term physical disability in the human population. This is not a UK or a USA or a country type of issue. This is actually a global concern, and this point must not be missed. There is a lot of research that's been undertaken, in Canada, United States, and Western Europe, which indicates that there is a prevalence of these types of issues. Okay. It's also important to understand that according to the World Health Organization, musculoskeletal conditions represent some of the most physically disabling conditions. So it's really important that what we do is we, sort of bear this in mind and also look at the other campaigns that are available to us, such as the one that's been running across OSHA Europe, because actually this is a topic is seen of significant importance. The key to this is that actually remote working, can lead to a sedentary lifestyle, which actually then will sort of be a cause of musculoskeletal disorders. So what are some of the the thoughts around this? Well, actually, if we look at it, our commute actually offers us a route to exercise every day. Our office environment offers us a form of exercise and social interaction. And really what we've got to be able to do is actually consider that we need to build in exercise to our day. And it should be no surprise that we're seeing lower levels of activities than before, because actually the initial excitement of, sort of lockdown and the freedom that it provided has actually gone. And I think there is, as a result, an ongoing debate on whether remote working is seen as in a positive light. Prior to the pandemic, most remote working was not formalised or risk assessed, and this is a really important point. And I think the important issue here is that people normally who work remotely fell into a sales or consultancy role are not seen as part of the office population. And also those people in the past who have remote worked have normally been of a senior status or technical staff. I think the other thing that I would like to do in this next slide is actually to show you how some of the attitudes are starting to change towards, before and after. What we've actually seen prior to lockdown, there was that positive benefit of, working from home will actually mean it will give me back, more opportunity to exercise. But actually what we've seen is that working from home can actually provide a challenge in what exercise looks like. There is that thought of, social togetherness beforehand of, I can enjoy more time with my family without actually seeing the consequences of actually working together in a small space all competing for time, on Wi-Fi, and undertaking work. So it's really important that what we do is that when we're actually weighing up what are the benefits and challenges of remote working, that we actually do consider that difference between the two. And what I would suggest is that, I am going to encourage you to download and have a look at the white paper, but this actually will set some of the thoughts around actually what are the challenges of working in this type of environment. And I think, we need to look at it from that point of view. I think the other topics that we need to consider as we progress is that, sort of when we actually are looking to move back into the workplace, that we need to actually have a look at, sort of local regulatory requirements and culture. And, one of the things that I would feed back to you is that from our research, remote working is embraced across the globe and can be made to work, but really it is subject to our infrastructure, access to information and communication technology, and also the support that staff get from their leadership teams. Our research, has looked at also the duty of care that's required. And this is one of the challenges within regulation as it stands. So when you actually, sort of sit down and have a look at it, there is a lack of regulation in respect to, or direct regulation in respect of teleworking or remote working. So it's important that really what we do is we actually sit down and have a look at this from a perspective of an employer's duty to risk assess the risks of ill health to individuals. And really the risk of ill health amongst those that are remote working or potentially working part-time remotely can be seen quite high. And it's important that organisations mitigate this and assess the risks of ill health to their staff. And this is important in a number of different areas. So when we start to look at a return to work exercise, it's important that what we do is we start to look at, sort of a legal compliance perspective, because if we don't, it could lead to a triple hit to an organisation. And that triple hit comes in the forms of prosecution, workers' compensation, and third-party claims and reputational damage. So it's really important we look at this. And again, just to reinforce this duty of care and the message of the duty of care is not new and was actually called out by Sally Rolfe yesterday at the presentation that she gave. We've got to remember that the current situation that businesses find ourselves in is very different to what it was in June 2020. And I would encourage you and your organisation to take this threat quite seriously, because from our perspective, it's cheaper to actually look at it, undertake your risk assessment and have an appropriate program in place than it is to defend and pay the costs associated with the, an issue of prosecution or a claim. The second thing that I would highlight to you, and this is something that I would really reinforce and was picked up by our keynote speaker today, and that is training. Most staff returning to the work, environment, it's going to be new to them. There are going to be challenges that they face, and there are anxieties that, we need to consider. And I think it's also important that what we do is we remind people about the standards and behaviour that we expect from them in the workplace. I think it's also really important that what we do is we look at things that, we need to train people on, and that includes things such as emergency procedures. And also, we need to make sure that we spend a bit of time also focusing on our leadership teams. Because I think one of the key issues that we have, and we've seen during this pandemic, that, a lot of managers have actually spent a lot of time actually engaging with their teams and making sure that those teams are in a good place. And we mustn't forget that actually in our return to work or a return to a new way of working, that actually we do make sure that we're bringing all our staff along with us and communicate effectively with them. The last thing I would talk to you about is really we need to formalise the workplace. What I mean by that is traditionally remote working has been seen as a perk. So in other words, it's a nice thing to do. It's a gift from, your line manager to allow you to have a little bit more time back. But in reality, and if we look at where we are currently, most organizations haven't formalized contracts, haven't actually had a look at, sort of the implications of staff having equipment at home, or actually the long-term, issues of, sort of making sure that equipment is maintained appropriately. There are other issues as well about, sort of actually making sure we're quite clear on where the workplace is, because we've got issues such as, if somebody was to have an accident or, have an injury, actually, who's responsible? And also those other issues around security of both equipment and information. And this was something else that was discussed during our presentations earlier on. There are a host of other topics. And again, if you are a HR professional or a health and safety professional, this is the time really I would encourage you guys to get together and really start talking about, actually what is it we need to be doing? Because I think, the most important thing that we should be thinking about at the moment is that we can see the challenges, we can see the benefits of remote working, but actually from an organizational perspective, we need to make sure that we've got a formal process in place where our processing staff are risk assessed, and also we have appropriate trainings in place. There were two other areas I'd just like to briefly touch on. The first one is the environment, and the other one is our responsibility to our local environment and our sustainability programs. So the first one is there appears to be a bit of a misconception that our carbon footprint has changed for the better, and actually organizations are reporting that our carbon footprint has reduced because we no longer heat our buildings or cool our buildings, and we don't do business travel. But they've forgotten that actually they've got a workforce that actually has a carbon footprint, and that is at home. We've got to actually make sure that any future programs we have, and we're looking at remote working, we need to actually make sure we address the issue of actually how we do our environmental reporting. And finally, my last point to you about, our sustainability programs is we've got a responsibility to our communities. And when we are actually looking at remote working and the like, I would encourage you as an organization to actually have a look at your, the implications of working away from the office or remote working, because one of the things that I'm very, conscious of is that if you've looked at the travel and the hospitality industry, they've been really badly hit, but so have the small businesses that have been reliant upon the business of office workers. So I would encourage you guys to actually take that view of, as a responsible organisation, to actually have a look at your sustainability programme as well. So just to close off, there's an awful lot to learn from the past, but also where we've got to at the moment and where we need to be. And I think we've got to take that learning forward. The pandemic has shown that teams have been creative, flexible, and embrace new ways of working, and managers have learned new skills. But as we come to the next phase in our response to the current pandemic, we need to look forward on how we formalise our approach to working, and we also manage to mitigate the risks that potentially are bubbling away in the background. We must use this knowledge we've gained at this time to support our businesses and teams. And at this point, I'd like to thank you for your time today. I'm not sure whether we've got any time for any questions, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them via the Q&A session.